getting the computers starting recording. So I'm David Ogborn, and I'm pleased to be here with you all tonight and welcome you to the Networked Imagination Laboratory, this space here at McMaster University, one of several spaces that are participating in tonight's performance of Temezcal dos. It's a real privilege to be here in this space, surrounded by this amazing loudspeaker system that you're going to hear, and these video walls. It's a very special place. This place, this spot that we're sharing, is also the treaty lands and territories, the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee people. And there are specific responsibilities that fall to each of us that are here without exception as a result of that. There's a lot that could be said about that, but I think perhaps for the moment I will just say that those responsibilities that fall from the nature of this land and its complex colonial histories are things that take ongoing learning and effort for each of us to figure out, and also for collectives to figure out. So it's my intention that the space that I'm so privileged to be a part of, the Networked Imagination Laboratory, it's my intention that this be a place where those responsibilities are taken seriously, on a day-to-day basis, and then it will be one of hopefully many such spaces across McMaster where those responsibilities are taken seriously. So, with the important things said, I think we are ready to begin tonight's performance of Temezcal dos. And there'll be some chance to talk with the artists and to learn more about what it is you're about to experience after the performance. Thank you, everyone.
Mi abuela murió en Magdalena Yodocono de Porfirio Díaz, municipio de Nochistlán, en Oaxaca, el 16 de noviembre de 2017 a las 11:30 p.m. alrededor de sus 3 hijas. Una de ellas, mi madre, quien nació el 16 de noviembre de 1958. A partir de ese momento, la muerte nos acompañó en la familia por 2 años más, teniendo que despedir a 2 primos, una prima y un sobrino de 20 años. Por mi cercanía, la muerte de la más grande, mi abuela, y el más chico, mi sobrino, fueron las más dolorosas, y en lo personal reestructuraron mi relación familiar. Mi abuela nació en las 3 veces heroica ciudad de Tlaxiaco, en el corazón de la Mixteca Alta, el 5 de febrero de 1921. Mi sobrino falleció el 5 de febrero de 2019 en Tultepec, Estado de México.
Bueno, lo que ella me comentó en alguna ocasión fue que iba con su hermano a Tlaxiaco, iban a un pueblito, no recuerdo el nombre del pueblito, a tomarse hacer sus baños de Temazcal, los cuales consistían en vaporizaciones de muchas hierbas que les hacían ahí. Pues ella incluso a mí me dio baños de hierbas cuando recién yo tuve a ciencia, a Irene, todavía con Leslie, me preparó mi mamá mi baño, porque estaba todavía aquí. Pero ya después ya no. Entonces sí hablaba con frecuencia de eso porque pues para ella era un remedio muy bueno. O sea, tenía muchas, vamos a decir que beneficios, ¿no? Muchos beneficios y ella lo veía así. Entonces sí hablábamos con frecuencia porque decía, ahora ya no es igual, ¿no? Ya la gente, incluso pues el hecho de ir a los hospitales, como que te niega esa parte de reposo, claro, o de tranquilidad, pues, porque te brinda un poco de tranquilidad. Y supe yo ya muy jovencita, no fue a temprana edad, sino yo creo que ya cuando era yo como más que adolescente, en alguna plática que tuve con mi mamá, a raíz del alumbramiento de uno de mis sobrinos, ya me comentó que pues en su época o en la época que le tocó a ella tener a sus hijos, se acostumbraba baños de temazcal, pues para reforzar el cuerpo de la mujer con el desgaste que había sufrido al tener uno. Mi mamá le enseñó a ella pues muchas de las cosas que ella sabía para limpiar, para curar el estómago o el empacho, todo eso se lo enseñó mi abuela. Sí, porque luego ya necesitaba saber y ya cuando llegaban a verla cuando llegaba mi abuela, ya le explicaba y le decía cuando te pase esto, haces así, y le enseñaba cuáles eran las revistas, cuáles era tu nombre para un té. Porque pues, tú, por ejemplo, conoces el pericón, la hierba del borracho, para que son, ¿no? Entonces, ella nos iba diciendo el nombre de las plantas y para qué eran y cómo se preparaban las sustancias o cómo le hiciera yo para curarles el estómago, el empacho, por ejemplo, cuando tienen pegado en el estómago que se les truena, que también tienen cuidado cuando lo hacen. Yo sí te dije que no. De forma directa ella no me comunicó a mí, pero yo sabía que ella lo traía, pero desde su familia. Pues a ella realmente donde creo que estaba el Temazcal era en Tlaxiaco, porque su mamá, o sea, mi abuela, Petrona, ella se dedicó durante un tiempo a hacer medicina tradicional. De hecho, cuando ignoro el año, pero ella estuvo a punto de graduarse como partera en esa época, porque seguía esa línea, pues. Y mi mamá, pues aprendió de esa parte, y ahí es a donde yo sé que había un Temazcal. Y ella, lo único es que al fusionar su familia, bueno, al casarse con mi papá, ella adquiere también el conocimiento de mi abuela paterna, de Josefa, y ella la indujo a que siempre tuviera un baño, y no tan parecido a un temazcal en forma, a un baño después de tener de hierba. O sea, ella preparaba su infusión. Bueno, lo de conectar a todas algunos años, porque después de tener hermanos, de tener había un baño parecido que era lo más caliente que tomaste en esas camas como las metálicas. Como las metálicas, sí. Y ahí lo más caliente que Supuestamente ella tenía hay un solar atrás de la iglesia, aquí en el pueblo. Allá atrás de la iglesia y por ahí estaba construyendo un temazcal, pero que estaba ella, no para hacer esa persona. Los cuales constituyen vaporizaciones de muchas hierbas que le estacionan. Pues a nosotros en lo particular, a todos mis hermanos y a mí, dice que hacía una especie como de chupón, así muy rústico, pero lo rellenaba de una hierba que se llama escule. Y entonces cuando nos terminaba de bañar y eso, nos daba ese como chuponcito. Y entonces, pues yo no sé qué tendría la hierba, pero nos dormíamos rápido. A lo mejor era un somnífero natural, o no sé, pero nos daba ese escule. Después nos daba pues algún tipo de hierba amarga ya cuando estábamos más grandecillos, que para que no se nos derramara la bilis o que por más corajes que hiciéramos no nos pasara nada. Eran hierbas amargas, así como algún compuesto, como a veces que cuando ella se nos pone algún ojo rojo o algo así, nos daba té de ruda, que porque teníamos un aire o algo así. Y entonces, pues yo me acuerdo de eso. Luego, cuando nos dolía el estómago, nos ponía hierbas de grilla, de un árbol que se llama grilla, y tiene una especie como de frijolito y ese lo ocupan para hacer aceites. Y con esa grilla nos ponía con manteca y ceniza con la que se hace la lumbre, la ceniza que queda. Nos ponía ceniza, huevo, alcohol, y luego nos ponía esa hierba de grilla. Y ya nos ponía una como faja y con eso nos componíamos del estómago, pero súper. De eso era lo que más me acuerdo que nos hacía. ¿Recuerdas al tío Nacho, que vivía ahí cerquita de la casa? Sí. Él era, lado, ¿no? Él era curador, pero de los huesos. Él te curaba iba hasta conseguir resinas especiales de los árboles en el monte, que de ocote, que en pino, cosas así. Pero las utilizaba en diferentes lugares del cuerpo. No te ponía una resina, por ejemplo, de cote en tu brazo donde te doliera, sino era otra. Y para el pie ya era otro tipo de resina.
cuando nació Lalo, tu primo, se puso muy malo del estómago. Y entonces yo hablé a la casa y le dije a mamá que si nos hacía favor de curarlo del estómago. Le digo, yo voy por ti, madre, te traigo y toda esa cosa, yo te llevo. Todo. Sí, dice, haz de cuenta, dispuesta a más no. Sí, y ya vino de allá de San Agustín, de la traje. Imagínate, para ella lo que representó hacer el viaje en metro. Claro. Y donde que mi mamá pues era algo para subir las escaleras eléctricas y todo. O sea, toda una gama. Pero llegamos a la casa, curó al niño, y aunque uno dice, ay, que unas simples hierbas, pero esas hierbas, bien administradas, lo sacaron así. Y lo pusieron bien.
Pues era una mujer que se dedicaba a ser partera y curaba con hierbas y cosas de esas. Les daba, bueno, me comentaba que les daba un té de algunas hierbas de un compuesto para que facilitaran el parto. Y entonces después usaban una como escobetilla, y le hacían así una como que les picaban en la cabeza y luego les metían al temazcal. Bueno, yo tengo entendido que sí hay un documento que la avalaba como la mejor partera de Tlaxiaco, la mejor y la única, creo. Y ya después, cuando empezaron ya a ver doctores como tales en Tlaxiaco, ella los asistía cuando había ese tipo de...
Una de mis tías, la segunda de 7 personas que constituyen ese núcleo familiar, es la más cercana a la herbolaria y a la medicina tradicional. Me cuentan que es porque en algún momento de su vida ella vivió en Yodocono. Ahí ella veía como mucha gente se acercaba a mi abuela para que curara a los niños de empacho, de mal de ojo, de espanto, etc. Una de las cosas que me interesó de la anécdota de mi tía Flor es la autonomía del cuerpo que da esa relación con las plantas y ese conocimiento del cuerpo, esa escucha y esa lectura que solamente se da con el conocimiento situado.
tradiciones vernáculas. Y entonces, ¿en dónde quedan las voces de compositores que se han nutrido de estas él trasciende, o sea, él trasciende, o sea, y él trasciende, o sea, él trasciende, o sea, y 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 él trasciende. No es nada conmigo, creo que esto realmente es una cuestión mucho más profunda, es y qué hacer con esas influencias y cómo trabajarlas y cómo apropiarse de ellas para generar algo que sea realmente representativo.
Además de las reconsideraciones de Yasnaya Gil acerca de la oralidad y su vuelta a lo mnemotécnico, los cuerpos, la geografía en donde se encuentran dichos cuerpos en relación al del conocimiento depositado, la disposición de los cuerpos a preservar dicho conocimiento, me parecen igualmente importantes, siendo todas estas cualidades pilares que sostienen a la memoria a través del material humano. Silere se dice a las personas, animales y objetos que tienen la capacidad de guardar silencio. Tacere se dice de aquellos objetos que por su incapacidad de producir sonido se encuentran en un silencio permanente. Aquellas plantas, métodos y formas de acercarse al mundo se encuentran en modo silere dentro de mi núcleo familiar. A simple vista, pareciera que las huellas del temazcal están completamente erosionadas, pero que en este momento se esté hablando sobre esto me parece suficientemente relevante. De las 6 personas que entrevisté, solo las mujeres de la familia sabían acerca del temazcal, y solamente mi madre, la menor, sabía dónde se encontraba el temazcal en Yodocono. Además de utilizar vapor de agua y piedras, el ramo de hierbas que se utilizan dentro del temazcal son de vital importancia, pues a través de golpes o de una infusión entran y purifican el cuerpo. Mentiría si digo que conozco cuáles fueron las hierbas que utilizaba mi abuela o mi bisabuela para recibir a alguien en el temazcal, pero por otra parte, puedo nombrar algunas con las que mi abuela nos curó a lo largo de varios años: ruda, coyote, itanduco, pericón, cempasúchil, hierba santa.
Así.
No me acuerdo si fuiste tú o fue mi abuela que me pusieron, bueno, yo creo que unas hierbas en el estómago
Fue mi mamá.
y me cubrió y
Así.
me dijo, es que tienes mucho calor en el estómago. Y yo, o sea, como niño, pues sí pensaba como que sí, que había calor y me decías que las plantas lo van a absorber. Y yo nunca, bueno, hasta que lo vi el otro día, que las hierbas estaban como secas, como quemadas, unas estaban negras, como quemadas.
Sí, porque hay, por ejemplo, hay un té que inclusive ocupaba la flor de centaucel que la secaba y ella como que la molía, no sé, pero también ocupaba lo de la molleja del pollo, ¿sí? Lo quitaba y la secaba y todo y la llegaba a ocupar en alguna
También la
cosa.
trituraba o la...
Pues a nosotros en lo particular, a todos mis hermanos y a mí, dice que hacía una especie como de chupón, así muy rústico, pero lo rellenaba de una hierba que se llama estilo. Y entonces
a volar, porque mi mamá vivía en la tiempo.
and then we can have the artist talk, and I will just stop the recordings and all that. So just give me 5 minutes.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for Alejandro and Rolando's final performance for their residency at Factory Media Center. Factory Media Center is a not-for-profit, artist-run center located in Hamilton, Ontario. We program experimental film and media art, provide equipment, and facilitate artistic production. We're live at the Networked Imagination Laboratory in Hamilton, Ontario, and Rolando is joining us from the Encuraduria headquarters in Mexico City. So before we begin, I want to extend a big thank you to David Ogborn and Jessica Rodriguez for masterminding the space for us tonight, as well as Factory's funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, City of Hamilton, and Insight Foundation for the Arts. Alejandro and Rolando are both experienced composers, live coders, and sound artists, as you saw here tonight, and I'm very excited to hear more about their work. I'm going to pass it off now. Thank you so much.
So, hello everybody, thanks for coming. It's really a pleasure to actually have a live in-person concert here, but also online, which I think that it is very productive start to thinking not in binary terms of online and in-person spaces. So start exploring hybrid spaces is also a way forward, given the current ongoing pandemic situation. Well, what you just saw is our second on-the-fly live-coded documentary that, differently from the documentaries that you often see, it is a performed documentary. And, that has to do that with Rolando, myself, and, Diego, which he didn't took part in the, let's call it, composition of the documentary or the, gathering of materials for the documentary or the idea, but he took part on the performance, on the interpretation of the music. He was the person doing all the music parts, all of the maracas. He's our maraca player, our virtual maraca player. So it has to do that it is live because we are musicians by formation. I studied composition and jazz. Rolando studied classical guitar and is a independent sound artist based in Mexico City. And Diego has a formation as a philosopher, a programmer, and a composer also. Our organization is called and doesn't mean anything. It means Unit of Morbid Temporal Explorations, but actually we just like how it sounds and it's mysterious. And you'll see that humor is a big part of what we do. This documentary is a way of doing many things at the same time. No, we believe that documentaries sometimes have this very anthropological gaze, and when we perform it live, that sort of gets diluted a little bit because realism doesn't take part of the narrative as much as as other things that are important, like the mood, the feeling of it, the texture, which is not so much about the narrative or about the objective aspects that we could be narrating, but other things. We're creating a big archive of images, and that is something that is very relevant for our documentary research, as all documentary probably is. And that is just like the introduction. Now, what you just saw is a documentary that was composed as a counterpoint. We were thinking of it in musical terms. A counterpoint is basically two melodic lines played in parallel that sort of complement each other but have a lot of autonomy. That is what we wanted with this narrative, and that has to do with Rolando and myself's positionality and our thoughts about the concept of Temazcal. The first narrative of this documentary is Rolando's family. Rolando's family is from a place called Yodocono in Oaxaca, something like 3 hours away from the capital city of Oaxaca, which is a state in the south. And this place is beautiful. Many pictures of what you just saw are from Yodocono. There was a church where the family's first Temazcal was. there was like this forest kind of place with red earth, which is very beautiful. There are these mountains that are like walking distance from Rolando's family home. And well, what Rolando is narrating is how all of his aunts and uncles were born in a Temazcal, because the Temazcal is this steam house that is related with rituals of pregnancy and health. And Rolando's family, all of them except Rolando's mom, were born in a Temazcal. And that is because Rolando's mom had to migrate to Mexico City before she could. Well, no. Rolando's grandparents have to move to Mexico City before Rolando's mother was born. So that is a comment that we're trying to make about immigration. Now we're trying to explain why this immigration happens. That has to do with process of violent expropriation, etc., etc., etc. And my part of the documentary has to do with a music piece from the 80s called Temazcal that was written by Javier Alvarez, a Mexican composer. He's sort of like not a pioneer, but perhaps the person that made electroacoustic music common, let's say, like produced the first canonical works of electroacoustic music in Mexico. His education is British. He went to university in the UK, in London, and well, there's a lot of influence from that in his work. He was doing his PhD in a time in which electroacoustic music research was sort of changing drastically in the way that composition was assessed. Instead of working with parametric notation or just working with parameters like pitch, which are abstractions, mathematical abstractions, etc. In this era, in UK, they started exploring cognition and the representation of rhythmic patterns, like higher order kind of things, rather than parameters. Temazcal is a very interesting musical work, and what is relevant about it is that it became canonic not only in the Mexican context, it became canonic in the whole electroacoustic music, tradition or sub-tradition, or however we can call it. And well, what we're trying to do here is to frame this music piece as problematic, not with the hopes of canceling it or with the hopes of, inhibiting or suppressing Javier Alvarez's great work, but with the intention to keep thinking it, and also to, be clear and to state that there's nothing and no one beyond criticism and critical thinking. No. The piece is problematic because Javier Alvarez is a very white person, and he is appropriating a lot of symbols and a lot of traditions and a lot of ideas that, he doesn't participate in the construction of these ideas and symbols because these belong to other kind of communities in Mexico. So we're trying to explain how this is problematic and explain how Mexican culture tends to reproduce this appropriation in a generalized and systemic level. The Mexican state keeps promoting appropriation as a way of colonizing indigenous territories and lives. So I guess that's a good 5 or 10 minutes of me talking about what you just saw. And I guess now we can have questions if you want. Yeah.
I was wondering, I have two questions.
Uh-huh.
The first one is if you could kind of maybe just break down a little bit the way that the collaboration visually tonight kind of happened. So yeah, kind of, because I know there were multiple performers, and kind of what your kind of role within just like the context of collaborating tonight was.
Okay, yeah, we can go into it. This performance is done by a, let's call it practice, called live coding, which means that we are typing code in an interface. The interface is called Estuary. It's the thing that you were watching here. Like all of this typing was produced live. Well, we were copy pasting a lot of it, and we also generated a lot of like ways of generating code rather than writing it down. I mean, at some point in the last 2 months, someone wrote the code, and that was usually me. No, I am. Let's say that Rolando is the part of this collaboration that was, let's call it, more in charge of, going to Yodokono, recording, interviewing the family, generating the archive that we're using for the documentary. I was more in charge of coding. So often Rolando and I sat in our computers with a video call, going to Estuary, and he explained me an idea about what he wanted the scene to be, and I just assemble it together with code. And then that code becomes another abstraction that is called with the mini languages that we were using. For example, we have 13 scenes, so se means one in Nahuatl. So we were using this language as a way of condensing and making the code much more compact. So we could be, while performing, freer to just calculate when exactly we want the code to happen. No, this is very different from what happens usually in a live coding performance. Live coding is mostly an improvisatory practice, and well, that has its merit, and that is very useful in many ways. In network environments, actually, it's very useful to have like a set of loose rules with which you play. No, but what we wanted to do is also like to think of live coding as a way of generating other things, no, not as a self-referential practice. Live coders tend to do that a little bit, I think. So yeah, basically, Rolando generated a big archive. I coded it, most of it. And while performing, Diego was doing the music, all of it. He had a language called Kakilisli that is tidal, obscured by these abstractions that I'm talking about. And he is partially improvising. He has like a big script in which we have sections where he just unleashes the code and just makes variations of the code. Then there are sections in which he's free to do whatever he wants. And there are sections in which, well, sort of free to do whatever he wants. And then sections in which he just also unleashes the code and does nothing else because the code is full enough. No? What I mostly am doing is doing all of the sort of background images, like the backgrounds that are like colorful and shifting and like the most trippy things of the performance. I was in charge of that. And we designed a language for that called Ishkopiname, which means image. And underneath that, we're coding with a language called Punctual, which is created here by David. And yeah, I am sort of providing the whole sort of environment, like the mood, I guess. No, was very free in doing that, and I am just unleashing the code for that. And Rolando is, oh yeah, I'm also in charge of just pushing into the environment the interviews of Rolando. I am doing this in a very, as a musician, like with a score basically. Rolando designed the score and I just perform the score as it is basically. And Rolando was pushing all of these videos that emerged from the background and were very concrete images like the shaman dancing and you know, like the church where the Temazcal used to be, etc. So yeah, that's a collaboration.
So going back to Manuel Alvarez? No, Javier.
Javier, yeah.
Yeah, so what do you think could be, no, so it's very interesting the reinterpretation that you're doing, I found it very nice. And then if he was like, so how would you think, like because Manuel Alvarez, okay, he was studying, as you were saying, I don't know the story, but he was studying in the UK. So when going back to Mexico, what do you think could have been his, like his themes in order for him to not appropriate the idea of the Temazcal or the I saw you were talking about cognitive or mnemonic. Anyways, yeah, I guess the ideas of indigenous people, but and on the other hand also maybe like differentiate from what he was learning in the UK. Like what could have been for you this, or yeah, I was wondering if you could speculate a little bit in terms of what you think could have been the better path for his career or
Yeah,
his work.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, let's go into that exercise, I guess, no? And I guess like what we're doing is actually the sort of concretization of that speculative exercise, no? Like we are, I mean, first of all, we are questioning the idea that appropriation is intrinsically a negative thing or a destructive thing. At least for me, like my positionality here is that I am Rolando's friend, and Rolando has a story to tell. And I have another story to tell that has to do with my personal experience and my obsessions and neuroses and grumpiness. So we're just saying that, and I won't be able to just say my part of the thing without Rolando's part. I do think that if I would present this piece without Rolando's part, it will be, I don't know, very, how to say it, not very generative in terms of what people could get from it, other than there are things that you cannot do, no? And I don't think that's a good way of doing it. So Rolando has this story, and he's just saying a thing that that sort of belongs to him. No, he's not appropriating anything. Now, what we're doing also is appropriating Javier Alvarez's work, no, to actually, you know, generate attention and etc. So I guess we're re-articulating appropriation to think critically about what exists in this world. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think that times were very different in the 80s and now. But what I can also say is that I do think that electroacoustic music, as well as the concept of sound art, as well as the concept of experimental music, as well as the concept of live coding or bio art or etc., have a very clear trajectory for me from Europe or Anglo-America, and then it disseminates and spreads towards what let's call the global south. I do think that we don't need to speculate in order to understand what can be different, because we are live coders that if we go to Mexico, because of our relationships here in Canada, and you know, etc., there's a lot of privilege there, and there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of, in a lot of ways we could be doing the same thing that Javier Alvarez is doing, no? Which is using a relationship with a power, with a centralized power and the hegemony to, you know, to build a career, etc. So I guess we don't have to speculate. We just have to keep thinking through it and keep doing it.
Who wrote a text that was rearranged into patterns?
That was me.
Just checking.
Yeah. I wrote that thing in what I am calling right now pseudo-academic style. But yeah. If anybody feels like it, and I think this is part of the piece, you can go to the GitHub repository where all of these things are, including the script, all of the images, and these images are free to use by whoever to do whatever they want, including the codes of the piece. You can do the remix if you want, or you can just use it for your projects. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, and you can use that script to learn more about the piece or whatever.
So what do you think happens to the piece then when you make documentation of it and you release it? Because we've experienced it as this live documentary, albeit with lots of pre-compositional elements, but some improvised parts. I'm sure every performance is different, and that seems to be an important part of it. Is that somehow endangered when documentation of the piece is released and we experience it in a fixed way? Or are there ways of resisting, do you imagine ways of resisting that engulation? I'm not even sure if that's a word. of the piece. I mean, it's a question we could ask of lots of things.
Yeah.
Improvisations, right? That get recorded. So anyway, that's the question.
Yeah, I do think that that's an interesting question always. How does the thing lives on, no? The idea is that the documentary doesn't happen if we don't perform it, right? Like that's the goal of what we're doing, like to be able to actually to go to places and perform the documentary. How Rolando and I work is that whenever we're going to perform again the documentary, we are going to use other material. I mean, what you saw is something like the 10% of all of the archive. It's like, well, not 10%. Let's say, I don't know, 40%. No, so probably in 2 or 3 months we will have other ideas of how the documentary can be played, and we have a big archive to do that. Even perhaps changing the way it is structured, etc. Like even perhaps saying different things. But the idea is use the material of the documentary. Somehow the documentary is us and how we understand it, and how you remember it, and what feelings it sort of affects in audiences, and it lives as material in the internet, in the archive that we're producing, no. So yeah, I believe that the documentary doesn't have a form, or doesn't have like the form just emerges from the archive whenever we need to do it. So yeah, I don't know if that more or less is what you wanted to. Okay.
I guess you kind of have to keep doing it then.
Yeah.
Because if you don't,
yeah.
the last one will be interpreted as the authoritative one.
Yeah.
But if you keep doing it periodically, you keep unsettling that.
Yeah, definitely. There's like a tendency to, I mean, and that's the thing about network environments and network art. It is very difficult to actually make it work technically because the network is always changing. There are so many moving parts. So that is perhaps a problem, right? And there will be a point in which Rolando and myself are going to just submit the video, no? But definitely the idea is not to do that. So, yeah.
Another question, Alan.
Yeah.
I'm wondering who kind of your intended kind of audiences, you know, is it about like, you know, showing like, yeah, I guess when you conceive of it or when you imagine people experiencing it, who are those people? You know, is it for like live coders in Europe? Is it for like, you know, indigenous peoples that are like displaced in Mexico City? Like who kind of are you, I guess, imagine seeing it?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we imagine many things, no? Like I guess the first one is that, yeah, we are using like the particularities about I guess like Javier Alvarez was educated in the UK, no? So definitely we have in mind like a Anglo audience, like an audience from the Angloverse, what I call the Angloverse. Definitely, but I just recognized in the video feed that Rolando said that his family was there, like the family that lives in Mexico City at least. Definitely, those two are very important components of what we imagine the audience is. Another thing that we imagine is that a couple of people that appear in the documentary, like Javier Alvarez or like Gabriel Ortiz, which are very big names in the Mexico City scene, we just imagine them getting a little bit annoyed and perhaps being a little bit like, I don't know, like happy that we are talking about them or whatever, and ignoring us completely also, no? That's something that's sort of like, yeah, I wish it happens. Also, I think that a big part of the audience for this thing is going to be the live coding scene in, at least in Mexico City. And well, the people in Intercuraduría, which is a space that is more about sound art or visual arts, etc. It's a gallery, right? So, yeah, I guess that's a little bit what we imagine.
About the documentary, I was the idea of the documentary that you were saying that is very different to that documentary that maybe we are accustomed to, and I was wondering if why, like, what is the reason for you to call it a documentary rather than maybe, I don't know, like a multimedia piece or like a expanded literature piece or something? Or even live cinema.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's a good question, but and I think Rolando could give a much better answer here, but let me just try my best. I do think that documentaries have a lot of authority about what reality is, and we like to just take that authority for us, no? Like the style of documentaries is not objective, right? But pretends to be. It pretends to be very clear, straightforward, etc. I have been thinking about why we're not more clear about how to present the things. It's perfectly possible, I think. It's not a technical issue, but we decide not to, no? I do think that I like that we're obfuscating a little bit, many things like Rolando's family history, but also people is not completely sure probably if they see this, if we like Javier, like if this is an homage to Javier Alvarez or the complete opposite, no? And I think I like that ambiguity, like as an experience, no? If people experience the thing. Now, if you really want to experience everything that we did in a way in which it's clear and, perhaps closer to a documentary in terms of what we're saying and what information we're transmitting, etc. Like the archive is there for people to just explore it. So yeah, I don't think it is literature, because I think that I have this association of literature with fiction or poetry, stuff like that. And yeah, multimedia, I do think that I don't like having technical terms, what I do. Okay, yep.
Yeah, as you were just mentioning, like, I like that your definition of the documentary is something that it presents itself as objective, and calling this piece that like certainly like lends that kind of authority. As someone who's like not familiar with Javier Alvarez, like I was watching it and thinking, I don't know who this Alvarez guy is, but he sounds like an asshole. So like hearing that, like, is that, and until getting like understanding a bit more of like the context of your talk, like, I guess like what's your like reaction to that, to like someone like thinking that on like seeing your piece, like is that sort of like one of the intended reactions, I guess, like because it was meant to be this sort of like a more critical look at his work.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's something about the work that this is not completely dismissive about it, no? Like, I do think that, for example, the music is, I mean, if you see the original piece, you'll see how reminiscent it is from what you just heard, no? And I do think that we're making a point of look, this is also beautiful, right? But I do think that in Mexico there's a big problem. It's not particular to Javier Alvarez. I don't think it should be like a personal thing, no? There's a problem about how the narrative of the state, the narrative of the state is very different from the narrative that Canada has, for example, I think. The narrative of the Mexican state is that everybody's half indigenous, no? So everybody sort of can use any kind of indigenous, artifacts or whatever to express themselves as culturally, no? And artists like Javier Alvarez just assume that uncritically, no? I think that we have to just keep insisting that that's not the way of relating to this particular issue, no? And we should rethink it. A month ago, there was a talk of composers on decoloniality, and one friend of mine from Chile was describing it like watching the banker talk about capitalism. No, and it's funny because it is so extended, this idea that appropriation is just fair game in Latin America, that I think it's good to actually be critical about it, but definitely not personal about it, no?
Sorry, I have a question. Because you're talking about appropriation, and obviously you kind of like explain about the context of why you're touching these subjects that are very personal. To even like the three of you in different ways, but obviously more to Rolando. But now that you're living here in Canada, what do you think is the difference? Because I don't know, what you just say maybe one people uncritically hearing you could say that, oh yeah, in Canada we do it right. We don't appropriate because people here in Canada, they don't believe they're half Indian, half indigenous, half whatever. But now that you live in Canada, how do you navigate with the position here in Canada, and what do you think about that position? I don't know if
Yeah.
I make myself understand.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that there's nothing intrinsically bad about appropriation. I do think that there's a way of appropriating things that is not terrifying. I do think that like the issue is that all of our relationships are mediated by transactional mindset. Like everything can be capitalized, everything can be valued, everything can be good to build your career, etc. I do think that if we get rid of that, in particular, appropriation can be just an exchange of knowledge between different people, and that doesn't have to be bad. I do think that in Canada, that is just very difficult to explain or to understand, because I do think that this term that Mark Fisher came up, in I don't remember in which book, of business ontology is so deeply entrenched here, that I do think that it's very difficult to understand relationships beyond transactions. Yeah, I don't know. Like I think that appropriation is a very difficult subject here, and the tendency perhaps is to ignore issues of appropriation, or absolutely, stigmatize appropriation as something that is intrinsically bad, right? So I don't think that I want or need to hold that position. I do think that in many ways, this is a little bit like difficult now, but the Mexican social panorama is much better prepared to have conversations around this in other kind of environments, with half of a population basically that is beyond business ontology. No? Don't be sad. Oh, you didn't? I will stare at you.
So, I guess I was wondering what, walking away from the piece, what do you feel about the mestizo identity? Is it something that is unredeemable, that's like a problematic invention of colonialism that's used by the Mexican state? Or is it something that's also like a lived material reality of history, right? I guess what I think is interesting about the piece, just watching it right now, is it also feels like there's a counterpoint, two narratives about what it means to be mestizo happening, right? We have Alvarez's idea in the Mexican states, but then we also have Rolando's family history, and then Rolando also working really hard to kind of make sense of it and kind of recover it or recuperate his own family traditions and life history. So what do you think? Is mestizo also a post-colonial or decolonial reality that can be beyond victimhood, beyond domination, and also something that can be a form of resistance? Or I don't know, I guess thinking about all those post-colonial theorists, Homi Bhabha's hybridity, or Spivak's strategic ascent, all this super, theoretical stuff. But I guess I want to give you the opportunity to speak more about the theory of the piece. If you want to. I'm sorry, it's the end of the night and we're very tired and you need a beer.
No.
We can talk about this over beer too if you want.
Yeah, no. Well, the idea of mestizo in Mexico has roots, let's say, in 19th century thinking. After Mexico had a war and sent back Europe a prince in a box, Mexico started to develop some sort of identity, let's call it, or an autonomy, a certain autonomy from Europe or even from Anglo-America, but actually got tied more to Anglo-America than to Europe. A lot of research was made in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, about indigenous artifacts, etc. And an idea started to appear in the panorama of Mexican intellectuals that to differentiate Mexicans from Europe and from Anglo-America, we have the figure of the mestizo. No? This was developing, and then the Mexican Revolution happened. The Mexican Revolution, it's beyond many things, insane cultural revolution. The culture shifted dramatically. In the 20s, you had all kinds of modernist ideas, vanguardism, and a lot of nationalisms, 20 different kinds of ways of understanding what is the nation state of Mexico after the revolution. No? And all of this was very necessary because the revolution first tried to be a liberal state, more like Anglo-America. That failed horribly. Then the revolution took a fascist turn, and that failed horribly also. Then it took like a, let's call it anarchist, socialist turn, and that failed also. So something synthesized out of that, what was acceptable for colonial powers, but at the same time what was acceptable for Mexicans. And that is like the idea of the mestizo. And one of the main theorists of the mestizo is José Vasconcelos. But basically, the idea of José Vasconcelos, when you read it closely, is that mestizaje is whitewashing. It's something very similar to what we will call right now whitewashing, right? It's like the whitening of the Mexican population. And that is what the Mexican state have done since then. The Mexican state well, the population of Mexico in 1920 was something around 50% indigenous, speaking indigenous languages, etc. And by now it's 6% only. So that is a paradox, right? And a move that citizens from Mexico perform a lot of the time is to appear white in Mexico, but travel abroad and appear indigenous, no? So it's sort of convenient to have this kind of subjectivity lying around. That is the mestizo project that Javier Alvarez is sort of taking, right? I think that the mestizo project that Rolando is proposing is something that, it has to do with Ansaldúa, for example, the idea of the mestiza of Ansaldúa from the south of the US, in which she recognizes the tensions between her English-speaking self, her Spanish-speaking self, and her, I think, Nahua-speaking self, or at least her parents or grandparents that speak other languages other than Spanish or English, no? I do think that if I will summarize this piece somehow, the idea is to actually completely refuse the mestizo idea of the Mexican state and put in its place this other mestizo idea, which we're trying to put there as in, like, very simply, look, this is Rolando's family. This is how families in Mexico look like. These are the processes that shape families like Rolando, no? And the process is mostly both, it's complex, no? But it's mostly an economic process. It's a process in which there is expropriation of land. People move to the city, become cheap labor, get used to the life in the city. The city is extremely violent to them, etc. They move back to places like Yodocono, like Rolando's family moved back to Yodocono, and Rolando grew up half the time there, half the time in Mexico City. So it's, an ongoing process of moving. And I guess like the mestizo, the idea of the mestizo subjectivity is an idea of movement, not an idea of identity as in looking back for your roots, but an idea of changing, and change is good. And movement is good. And that was too long, so I'm done.